You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Well, happy Friday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. Welcome to my show. This is the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. Go over to odysy1.com to see all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio and check out all the different places where you can hear this show and look at their schedule for a good 24/7 schedule to have playing on your radio in the background. Or on your computer at least, which now serves as the modern radio. And for those of you who would like to view the video simulcast, come on over to my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Best feature over there is, of course, the chat room, which is going live right now. And that's all the Intrepheads gather every night to talk about the show and other things going on in their lives. So come on over, join the chat room. We'd love to have you. And as I said at the beginning, welcome. It's Friday. It's the last day of the week. Let me put in this little announcement right away at the beginning. Is over the weekend, we don't do any broadcasts on Odyssey, but I do my live broadcast every Sunday morning called It's Sunday at 9 a.m. Central Standard Time. That's 10 a.m. out east. That's 7 a.m. for you early risers out in California, Oregon, and Washington State on the West Coast. So come and join us on Sunday morning for good chat, good talk, a little more interaction with the chat room because we're all just live there and there's no real agenda on Sunday mornings. And we do some card readings and things like that and talk about other things with the week. So you're welcome to come over on Sunday morning for It's Sunday. And if I run out of time at the end, you won't hear that again today. So thanks for being here today. It's a rather grim topic that we're on tonight. And by grim, I mean that this is recounting history that is not taught particularly this way in public schools. It's not something we were raised knowing a lot of the details about. And that is the United States subjugation and conquering of the American West, subjugation of its peoples, the Native Americans. And now, let me put out there this one thought for you. I guess there's no other way to put it, is that I am a Native American, and so are many of you. We were born here. We may not be of indigenous cultures as our heritage, Indian cultures, we would say, in the vernacular. But I am Native American. I'm of European descent. I am of Welsh and Scot heritage. Less Scot than I thought I had once I did my DNA. But primarily Welsh. I've got a little bit of Scandinavian in there, which I never knew I had. My name, Roberts, comes from Robards, which is straight out of Wales in Great Britain. My ancestors landed here in 1710. We're talking a whole 66 years before the Declaration of Independence. And John Robards was the man. You see him kind of down, and if you're looking online here, if you're watching, down here in this corner, it's the little cartoon one of John Robards' grandsons, William Robards, as my son of a patriot, mascot, if you will. So one of my ancestors, John Robards' 5 grandsons all fought in the colonial army, the Continental Army, during the American Revolution. And so they settled in Goochland County, Virginia, and in 1710. And so you could say with my family line being here, now that's just my paternal line, but my family line being here for 300 years, I think makes me a Native American. 310 years, almost precisely. And so I am Native American, but I am not indigenous peoples, as by definition. So many of us are Native American. But, of course, as we define Native American, the indigenous cultures that were here before us, we drove them off their land, we took their land, we stole their land. That was the way conquering empires did in that day. And the United States, for all its glorious words of freedom and equality, that's what we did. And, of course, manifest destiny, eminent domain, all of those things we talk about almost every day. And so I think it's important that we understand what we did as a nation here, why there are issues between the United States government and Native American peoples. There was, I think it was Corin in the chat room who brought up last night the case with the Creek Reservation against the United States government. And the Supreme Court upheld just yesterday, that would be the 9th of July, Thursday, 2020, the Supreme Court upheld the original treaty. And John Gorsuch wrote the decision on that. And he said it is the United States' job to keep its word. And what is eventually going to happen, you have the Choctaw, you have the Cherokee, you have the Seminole, and there's one more reservation there. Please forgive me for not remembering the name. Those 5 reservations comprise about half of the state of Oklahoma. So what's going to happen when their treaty rights were being rescinded because white settlers were moving in? What's going to happen now? That has yet to be seen. But the Supreme Court of the United States upheld the Creek Reservation's claims to the original treaties, which were written in perpetuity, but have been stomped on by the United States for generations now. And so what's this going to mean for people who own homes there that are not part of the tribe? What's this going to mean for businesses? I would almost be willing to, now this is not fact, this is my opinion, this is my prediction, is that those people are going to be treated very fairly by the Native American reservation there, by the Creek. I believe that they will strike good deals with those people and good situations there, because all they wanted to do was live in peace together. As we have found talking about Black Kettle, he said, I just want to live in peace. And so I think, however, perhaps 150 years of getting slapped around a bit, losing more and more, maybe you'd see a different attitude in today's generation of Native Americans growing up on the Creek reservations, and the Cherokee, and the Choctaw, and all the others that live there. I don't know for sure. It'll be interesting to follow this story and see what happens from this point on. So, you can call it a victory for Native America, in that the Supreme Court of the United States upheld the original treaty rights, which were again being rescinded. So we'll get into another day, we'll get into the details of what that was all about. But that is very recent. That shows you how much in recent history this is. And I do make a differentiation between Black Americans and African Americans and their so-called oppressions and the things that trouble them. And the African Americans were brought here as slaves. They were freed 150 years ago. Yes, there was oppression, especially in the Deep South. Yes, there were problems. Yes, there was what some are defining as systemic racism. Yes, some of those things existed and exist in our system. But we have a system that is built for everybody who wants to take grasp of the opportunity and make their way. And that's, again, another discussion. But where I differentiate is in a Native America, they have had their reservations. which are basically sovereign countries under the auspices of the federal government of the United States. And this is where they have lived for the most part. And that reservation system is still under active treaty, which the Creek Indians just won in the Supreme Court yesterday. And so there is a difference between the peoples. There is a difference. And this show tonight is not to spell out all those differences. What I will do, I will have a show on that probably next week. We'll talk about some of this in more detail. But I find the rights of Native Americans to be upheld by the Supreme Court very encouraging. And that's because of who they were. That's because of the land they held that we took. That's because of our subjugation of their people. And so there it is, folks. And that's the perspective from which I'm telling these histories, which are basically unknown histories. As they say, history is written by the victors. And so the histories we've learned in schools, very cursory, about Native America, and the winning of the American West. It wasn't the winning, it was the conquering of, it was the subjugation of, to build the American empire from sea to shining sea. So that is the basis of what we're talking about tonight, and other nights in this whole series of looking at a different perspective of what happened to the Native American peoples. And many of us, me included, I keep running across facts I didn't know. And so it's good for us to know these things as we proceed forward. And now there is no choice for Native America and white America, if you will, European America, the United States government, all of us who live under this flag and under this Constitution. There's no way to go except forward. Can't go backward. You can't change things. But we can uphold what was promised by the government, and we can work together, all as citizens of this country. And that's the beauty of it right now, despite what happened in the past, which none of us living today are responsible for. I am not responsible for the sins of my fathers. Native America is not responsible for the sins of its fathers. None of us today are responsible for what happened. We're responsible for living in the here and the now and moving forward. And what happened with the Supreme Court yesterday is in the here and the now. This is a good thing. So I'm going to move on from that now. Let's get into picking up last night's story. And it's a bit, when I said it's grim, it's heart-wrenching to read about this stuff. It's heart-wrenching to learn about this stuff, to talk about it. It's heart-wrenching to hear about it. And so we left off with these soldiers moving in on Sand Creek Reservation, the camp, the Sand Creek camp. And we talked about the old guides and how that the old guide was a little too feeble at almost 70 years old to be very effective to lead them to the Sand Creek camp. So they pulled out a guy out of his bed at night, and he ends up being the third son of Bent. And William Bent, who the little white man, Native Americans called him. And so Robert Bent was pulled out. And so now all three of Robert Bent's sons, his half Cheyenne sons, would all be together at Sand Creek as the U.S. military moved in on the Sand Creek. And we see, as somebody mentioned even in the chat room last night, there was a plot going on to take care of the Black Kettle problem and the Cheyenne problem. So let's pick this up now. The Cheyenne camp lay in a horseshoe bend of Sand Creek, north of an almost dry stream bed. And I'm wondering if I can show you. Now, if you This might be a little hard to make all of this out, but I'm going to throw this up here. If you noticed our graphic for tonight's show, I have an old painting in the background. I'm going to throw this up so you can visually see this now while we're talking about this. Excuse me. This is Sand Creek, and this is where all this story is now going to focus, right here. Let's bring this up. Okay, this is the graphic for tonight's show, but you see in the background an old painting of Sand Creek, and you can see the creek running in from the north, or the top, not the north, the top of the picture, and around. It was on almost dry creek bed here, and you can see how Black Kettle and the Cheyenne and some Arapaho were all nestled into this spot. They were settled here. They encamped here. And you can see the U.S. soldiers now surrounding this horseshoe shape. And this is where they were encamped, and this is what Major Anthony and Chivington were closing in on. And so it was in this horseshoe bend of Sand Creek, and it was north of an almost dry stream bed. And Black Kettle's teepee was near the center of the village, and with white antelopes and war bonnets peopled to the west. And on the east side, and slightly separated from the Cheyenne, was Left Hand's Arapaho camp. Altogether, there were about 600 Indians in the creek bend, and 2/3 of them being women and children. And most of the warriors were several miles to the east, hunting buffalo. Remember, Anthony gave them rights to go hunt buffalo. That was part of the plot beneath the surface. And Major Anthony told them, go hunt your buffalo. And so most of the warriors were gone from the camp. Now, so confident were the Indians of absolute safety, they kept no night watch except the pony herd, which was corralled below the creek. And the first warning they had of an attack was about sunrise. The drumming of hooves on the sand flats. I was sleeping in the lodge, Edmund Guerriere said. I heard at first some of the squaws outside say there were a lot of buffalo coming into camp. Others said there were a lot of soldiers. So Guerriere immediately went outside and started toward Gray Blanket Smith's tent. Now George Bent, who was sleeping in the same area, said that he was still in his blankets when he heard shouts and the noise of people running about the camp. From down the creek, a large body of troops was advancing at rapid trot. More soldiers could be seen making for the Indian pony herds to the south of the camps. In the camps themselves was all confusion and noise. Men, women, and children were rushing out of lodges, partly dressed, women and children screaming at the sight of the troops, men running back into the lodges for their arms. I looked toward the chief's lodge and saw that Black Kettle had a large American flag tied to the end of a long lodge pole and was standing in front of his lodge, holding the pole, with the flag fluttering in the gray light of the winter dawn. I heard him call to the people not to be afraid, that the soldiers would not hurt them. Remember, this is Black Kettle's flag that was given him in Washington, D.C., and he was told that as long as he flew that flag and his people lived beneath that flag, they were safe. They were part of the United States. But then the troops began to open fire from two sides of the camp. Now, young Guerriere had joined Gray Blanket Smith and Private Louderback at the trader's tent. Louderback proposed we should go out and meet the troops. We started. Before we got outside the edge of the tent, I could see soldiers begin to dismount. I thought they were artillerymen and were about to shell the camp. I had hardly spoken when they began firing with their rifles and pistols. And when I saw I could not get to them, I struck out. I left the soldier, and Smith. Now imagine this. You believe you are under the protection of the United States government. You're not expecting this. They're being attacked by the United States cavalry in the morning hours, pre-dawn hours, without provocation. So Louderback halted momentarily, but Smith kept moving ahead toward the cavalrymen. "Shoot the damned old son of a bitch!" a soldier shouted from the ranks. "He's no better than an Indian." This is the Louderback, the officer. So at the first scattered shots, Smith and Louderback turned and ran for their tent. Smith's half-breed son, Jack, and Charlie Bent had already taken cover there. By this time, hundreds of Cheyenne women and children were gathering around Black Kettle's flag. Up the Dry Creek bed, more were coming from White Antelope's camp. After all, had not the Colonel Greenwood told Black Kettle that as long as that flag flew above him, no soldier would fire upon him? So everybody's gathering around Black Kettle, flying this flag of protection, this flag of peace and truce. Now White Antelope, an old man of 75, unarmed, his dark face seamed from the sun and weather, he strode toward the soldiers. He was still confident that the soldiers would stop firing as soon as they saw the American flag and the white surrender flag, which Black Kettle now had run up. Medicine Calf Beckworth, riding beside Colonel Chivington, saw White Antelope approaching. He wrote, "He came running out to meet the command," Beckworth testified, and holding up his hand saying, "Stop! Stop!" He spoke it in as plain English as I can. He stopped and folded his arms until he was shot down. Survivors among the Cheyenne said that White Antelope sang the death song before he died. If I could do it in Native American style, I would, with the hey, 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 hey. I can't do that. I don't know the words. But in English, he sang, "Nothing lives long, only the earth and the mountains." This was the death song. From the direction of the... So he came out to stop the soldiers. He felt he was under protection. There must be some mistake going on here. "Stop!" he yelled twice, then crossed his arms and sang, "Nothing lives long, only the earth and the mountains." From the direction of the Arapaho camp, Left Hand and his people also tried to reach Black Kettle's flag. When Left Hand saw the troops, he stood with his arms folded, saying he would not fight the white men because they were his friends. He was shot down. Robert Bent, who was riding unwillingly with Colonel Chivington, said that when they came in sight of the camp, he said, "I saw the American flag waving and heard Black Kettle tell the Indians to stand around the flag, and there they were all huddled. Men, women, children." This was when we were within 50 yards of the Indians. I also saw a white flag raised. These flags were in so conspicuous a position that they must have been seen. I saw them. When the troops fired, the Indians ran some of the men into their lodges, probably to get their arms. I think there were 600 Indians in all. And I think there were 35 braves and some old men, about 60 in all. Pardon me. And the rest of the men were running away from the camp. Or were away from the camp. They were hunting. They were gone hunting under the orders of Major Anthony. So after firing, the warriors put the squaws and the children together, surrounded them to protect them. Could you imagine this scene? You take all the women and children and huddle them together, and all the men that were left stood around them to protect them. I saw 5 squaws under a bank for shelter. When the troops came up to them, they ran out and showed their persons to let the soldiers know they were squaws, and they begged for mercy. But the soldiers shot them all. I got to leave it right there in the middle of what he's writing here. We'll get back to this when we come back after the break. but you're getting the picture. Let this sink into your mind. What is happening here? Sit tight. We'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad so he can take me to Disneyland.
All right, gang, thanks for sitting tight through that break. We're going to pick up right where we left off, but first I've got to tell you, if you're new to the show during the second segment tonight, this is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. And you are watching the simulcast in video if you happen to be over on my YouTube channel, and that's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Come on over, join the chat room, already in full session going on now. Now, we left off with the attack by the U.S. soldiers on Sand Creek Camp, Black Kettle's camp. We're hearing some of the chiefs had come out to stop. We're not fighting. We're your friends. We're under the protection of Major Anthony. We're under protection of the flag given to Black Kettle. They were gunned down. Now, after firing, the warriors put the squaws and children together, and around them they surrounded them, the men that were in camp, not the warriors who were off hunting. The men who were left in camp surrounded to protect them. Imagine that scene. Imagine if it was in a city street. Women and children, and the men surrounding the old men, and the men that weren't out fighting or hunting, trying to protect the rest of them. When the troops came up to them, they ran out and they showed their persons to let the soldier know they were squaws. These are women. These are children. They begged for mercy. But the soldiers shot them all anyway. I saw one squaw lying on the bank whose leg had been broken by a shell. A soldier came up to her with a drawn saber. She raised her arm to protect herself when he struck. Breaking her arm, she rolled over and raised her other arm. Then he struck, breaking it, and then left her without killing her. There seemed to be indiscriminate slaughter of men, women, and children. There were some 30 or 40 squaws collected in a hole for protection. They sent out a little girl about 6 years old with a white flag on a stick. They sent the little girl out, appealing to the hearts of the soldiers. It's a little girl. They didn't send her out to kill her or have her shot. They sent her out with a white flag. She had not proceeded but a few steps when she was shot and killed by the U.S. soldiers. All the squaws in that hole were afterwards killed, and 4 or 5 bucks outside. Bucks, now this is the testimony being written, Indian men. The squaws offered no resistance. Everyone I saw dead had been scalped. I saw one squaw cut open with an unborn child, as I thought, lying by her side. Captain Soule afterwards told me that such was the fact. I saw the body of White Antelope with the privates cut off, his genitals cut off. I heard a soldier say he was going to make a tobacco pouch out of them. I saw one squaw whose private parts had been cut out. I saw a little girl about 5 years of age who had been hid in the sand. 2 soldiers discovered her, drew their pistols, and shot her, and then pulled her out of the stand by the arm. I saw quite a number of infants in arms, killed with their mothers. In a public speech made in Denver not long before this massacre, Colonel Chivington advocated the killing and the scalping of all Indians, even infants. Nits make lice, he declared. The dirty Indians. I remember my former mother-in-law, who, to the outward appearance, she looked Italian. She kind of looked like a, very stout, sturdy Italian woman. She had that look about her. Looked olive-skinned, dark hair and so on, and had that appearance. But she was, what was the tribe? They were part of the Six Nations. Oh, I just had it on the tip of my tongue, and why I just forgot the name of the tribe, I don't know. It started with an O. It slipped my mind. But I don't know why. But if the name of the tribe comes to me, I'll bellow it out as soon as it comes into my head. She was part of that tribe, and she said when she grew up, they claimed the Dutch side of their family, and the whites in her area in Wisconsin used to refer to the Indians as the dirty Indians, the kids. It's dirty Indians, full of lice, full of grime and so on. So it brought that memory up that she had told me that many, many years ago. So Robert Bent's description of the soldiers' atrocities was corroborated by Lieutenant James Connor, who said, "In going over the battleground the next day, I did not see a battleground." They're calling it a battleground. Going over the battleground the next day, I did not see a body of a man, woman, or child, but was scalped. And in many instances, their bodies were mutilated in the most horrible manner. Men, women, and children's privates cut out. I heard one man say that he had cut out a woman's private parts and had them for exhibition on a stick. I heard another man say that he had cut the fingers off an Indian to get the rings on the hand. According to the best of my knowledge and belief, these atrocities that were committed were with the knowledge of J.M. Chivington. And I do not know of his taking any measures to prevent them. I heard of one instance of a child a few months old being thrown into the feed box of a wagon, and after being carried some distance left on the ground to perish. I also heard of numerous instances in which men had cut out the private parts of females and stretched them over the saddle bows and wore them over their hats while riding in the ranks. This is grim stuff, folks. But think of this. This is what was being done to these people. A trained and well-disciplined regiment of soldiers undoubtedly could have destroyed almost all of the defenseless Indians at Sand Creek. Lack of discipline, combined with heavy drinking of whiskey during the night ride, cowardice and poor marksmanship among the Colorado troops made it possible for many Indians to escape. A number of Cheyenne dug rifle pits below high banks of the dry creek and held out until nightfall. Others fled singly or in small groups across the plain. When the shooting ended, 105 Indian women and children and 28 men were dead. In his official report, Chivington claimed between 400 and 500 dead warriors. He had lost 9 killed, 38 wounded of his own soldiers. Many of the casualties resulted from careless firing by the soldiers upon each other. And among the dead chiefs were White Antelope, One Eye, and War Bonnet. Black Kettle miraculously escaped by running up a ravine, but his wife was badly wounded. Left Hand, although shot down, also managed to survive. Captives at the end of the fighting totaled 7. John Smith's Cheyenne wife, the wife of another white civilian at Fort Leon, and her 3 children, and the 2 half-breed boys, Jack Smith and Charlie Bent. The soldiers wanted to kill the half-breed boys because they were wearing Indian clothing. Old medicine calf Beckworth rescued Charlie Bent by concealing him in a wagon with a wounded officer, later turning him over to his brother Robert. But Beckworth could not save Jack Smith's life. A soldier shot the trader's son by firing at him through a hole in the tent where the boy was being held prisoner. The 3rd Bent son, George, became separated from Charlie early in the fighting. He joined the Cheyenne who dug rifle pits under the high banks of the creek. "Just as our party reached this point," he said, "I was struck in the hip by a bullet and knocked down. But I managed to tumble into one of the holes and lay there among the warriors, women, and children." After nightfall, the survivors crawled out of the holes. It was bitter cold and blood had frozen over their wounds, but they dared not make fires. The only thought in their minds was to flee eastward toward the Smoky Hill and try to join their warriors who were out hunting. It was a terrible march, George Bent remembered, most of us being on foot without food, ill-clad and encumbered with the women and the children. For 45 miles they endured icy winds, hunger, pain of wounds, but at last they reached the hunting camp. As we rode into the camp, there was a terrible scene. Everyone was crying, even the warriors, and the women and the children screaming and wailing. Nearly everyone present had lost some relative or friends, and many of them in their grief were gashing themselves with knives until the blood flowed in streams. As soon as his wound healed, George made his way back to his father's ranch. There, from his brother Charlie, he heard more details of the soldiers' atrocities at Sand Creek. The horrible scalpings, the mutilations, the butchery of children and infants. And after a few days, the brothers agreed that as half-breeds they wanted no part of white man's civilization any longer. They renounced the blood of their father and quietly left his ranch. And with them went Charlie's mother, Yellow Woman, who swore that she would never again live with a white man. They started north to join the Cheyenne. It was now January, the moon of the strong cold. When the Plains Indians traditionally kept fires blazing in their lodges and told stories through the long evenings and slept late in the mornings, but this was a bad time, and as the news of Sand Creek and the massacre there spread across the plains, the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, the Sioux sent runners back and forth with messages calling for a war of revenge against the murdering white men. By the time Yellow Woman and the young Bent brothers reached their relatives on the Republican River, the Cheyenne were supported by thousands of sympathetic allies. Spotted Tail's Oglala Sioux, Pawnee Killer's Oglala Sioux, and large bands of northern Arapaho. Cheyenne dog soldiers, now led by Tall Bull, who had refused to go to Sand Creek, were there, and also Roman Nose and his following of young warriors. And while the Cheyenne mourned their dead, the leaders of the tribes smoked war pipes and planned their strategy. In a few hours of madness at Sand Creek, Chivington and his soldiers destroyed the lives or the power of every Cheyenne and Arapaho chief who had held out for peace with the white men. After the flight of the survivors, the Indians rejected Black Kettle as their chief and left hand, and they turned to their war leaders to save them from extermination. At the same time, United States officials were calling for an investigation of Governor Evans and Colonel Chivington, and although they must have known it was too late to avoid a general Indian war, they sent Medicine Calf Beckworth as an emissary to Black Kettle to see if there was any possibility of peace. Now you've got the federal government seeking peace, while Chivington and Governor Evans of Colorado had carried out this massacre, saying that their mandate was to kill the Indians and wipe them off the land. Beckworth found that the Cheyenne had soon learned that Black Kettle had drifted off somewhere with a handful of relatives and old men. The leading chief was now Leg in the Winter. That's the name of the new chief. I went into the lodge of Leg in the Winter, Beckworth said, and when I went in, he raised up and he said, "Medicine Calf, what have you come here for? You have fetched the white man to finish killing our families again?" I told him that I'd come to talk to him. "Call in your council." They came in a short time afterward and wanted to know what I had come for. I told them I had come to persuade them to make peace with the whites. Isn't this what they were doing already before the massacre at Sand Creek? Make peace with the white men. As there was not enough of them to fight the whites, as they were as numerous as the leaves of the trees, the white men. "We know it," was the general response of the council. "But what do we want to live for?" At this point, they're saying, what have we got to live for? The white man has taken our country, killed all of our game, was not satisfied with that, but killed our wives and children. Now, no peace. We want to go and meet our families in the spirit land. We love the whites until we found out they lied to us and they robbed us of what we had. We have raised the battle axe until death. This is what Sand Creek and the massacre there accomplished. They've taken our land. They've killed our wild game. They've killed our wives, our women, and our children. We don't want peace anymore. We will fight the white man until we are dead. They asked me then why I had come to Sand Creek with the soldiers to show them the country. I told them if I had not come with the white chief, I would have been hung. "Go and stay with your white brothers, but we're going to fight till death," they told him. I obeyed orders and came back, willing to play quits. That was Beckworth. In January of 1865, now to put it into context, this is just a few months before the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. In January of 1865, the Alliance of Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Sioux launched a series of raids along the South Platte, the Platte River. They attacked wagon trains, stage stations, small military outposts. You could say they were being indiscriminate in their attacks against the whites. And this is what we hear in history, we have learned in history over the past 100 years. Those savage Native Americans, savage Indians attacking white settlements. Remember, they said, we're done. We are done making peace. We will now fight the white man until we are dead. They attacked all these things. They burned the town of Julesburg. They scalped the white defenders in revenge for the scalping of Indians and children at Sand Creek. They ripped out miles of telegraph wire. They raided and plundered up and down the Platte route, halting all communications and supplies. In Denver, there was panic as food shortages began to grow. Oh, now they're panicked in Denver. When the warriors returned to their winter camp in the Big Timbers of the Republican, they had a big dance to celebrate their first blows for revenge. This was no longer about fighting for survival, seeking peaceful routes to live together. This was about revenge. Snow blanketed the plains, but the chiefs knew that the soldiers would soon come marching from all directions with their big talking guns. And while the dances were still going on, the chiefs held a council to decide where they should go to escape the pursuing soldiers. Black Kettle was there, and he spoke for going south, below the Arkansas River, where summers were long and buffalo were plentiful. Most of the other chiefs spoke for going north across the Platte to join their relatives in the Powder River country. No soldiers would dare march into that great stronghold of the Teton Sioux and the Northern Cheyenne. But before the council ended, the alliance agreed to send runners to the Powder River country to tell the tribes there that they were coming. Black Kettle, however, would not go, and some 400 Cheyenne, mostly old women, old men, and a few badly wounded warriors, agreed to follow him southward. And on the last day before the camp moved out, George Bent said farewell to this last remnant of his mother's people, the Southern Cheyenne. I went around among the lodges, and I shook hands with Black Kettle and with all my friends. These lodges under Black Kettle moved south across the Arkansas and joined the Southern Arapaho, the Kiowa, and the Comanches. With about 3,000 Sioux and Arapaho, the Cheyenne, including Yellow Woman and the Bent brothers, moved northward, exiled into a land that few of them had seen before. Along the way, they had fights with soldiers who marched out from Fort Laramie. But the alliance was too strong for the soldiers, and the Indians brushed them off as though they were coyotes snapping at a wild buffalo herd. When they reached the Powder River country, the Southern Cheyennes were welcomed by their kinsmen, the Northern Cheyenne. The Southerners, who wore cloth blankets and leggings, traded from white men, thought the Northerners looked very wild in their buffalo robes and buckskin leggings. The Northern Cheyenne wrapped their braided hair with strips of red-painted buckskin. They wore crow feathers on their heads. They used so many Sioux words that the Southern Cheyenne had difficulty understanding them. Morning Star, a leading chief of the Northern Cheyenne, had lived and hunted so long with the Sioux that almost everyone called him by his Sioux name, Dull Knife. And that name will come up again. At first, the Southerners camped on the Powder River about a half a mile apart from the Northerners, but there was so much visiting back and forth that they soon decided to camp together. They pitched their teepees in an old-time tribal circle with clans grouped together, and from that time on there was little talk of Southerners and Northerners among these Cheyenne. And in the spring of 1865, when they moved their ponies over to Tongue River for better grazing, they camped near Red Cloud's Oglala Sioux. The Cheyenne from the south had never seen so many Indians camped all together, more than 8,000, and the days and nights were filled with hunts and ceremonies and feasts and dances. George Bent later told of inducting Young Man Afraid of His Horses a Sioux into his Cheyenne clan. The Crooked Lances was his clan. This indicated how close the Sioux and the Cheyenne were at that time. Although each tribe kept its own laws and its customs, these Indians had come to think of themselves as the people. They were very confident in their power, and they were sure of their right to live as they pleased. White invaders were challenging them on the east in Dakotas. Dakota, actually, at the time. There's only one Dakota territory. And on the south along the Platte. But they were ready to meet all challenges. The Great Spirit raised both the white man and the Indian, Red Cloud said. I think he raised the Indian first. He raised me in this land, and it belongs to me. The white man was raised over the great waters, and his land is over there. And since they crossed the sea, I have given them room. There are now white people all about me, but I have a small spot of land left, and the Great Spirit told me to keep it. Through the springtime, the Indians sent scouting parties down to watch the soldiers, who were guarding the roads and the telegraph lines along the Platte. The scouts reported many more soldiers than usual, some of them prowling northward along the Bozeman's Trail, through the Powder River country. Now, Red Cloud and the other chiefs decided it was time to teach the soldiers a lesson. They would strike them at the point where they were farthest north, a place the white men called Platte Bridge Station. Now, because the Cheyenne warriors from the south wanted revenge for the relatives that were massacred at Sand Creek, most of them were invited to go along on the expedition. Roman Nose of the Crooked Lances was their leader. He rode with Chief Red Cloud and Dull Knife, an old man afraid of his horses. Almost 3,000 warriors formed the war party. Among them were the Bent brothers. The kids of Bent, the half-breeds. They were painted and dressed for battle. On July 24th, they reached the hills overlooking the bridge across the North Platte. At the opposite end of the bridge was a military post, a stockade, a stage station, and telegraph office. About 100 soldiers were inside the stockade. And after looking at the place through their field glasses, the chief decided they would burn the bridge, cross the river at a shallow ford below, and then lay siege to the stockade. But first they would try to draw the soldiers outside with decoys and kill as many as possible. 10 warriors went down in the afternoon, but the soldiers would not come out of their stockade. Next morning, another set of decoys lured the soldiers out onto the bridge, but they would come no further. On the third morning, to the Indians' surprise, a platoon of cavalrymen marched out of the fort, crossed the bridge, and turned westward at a trot. In a matter of seconds, several hundred Cheyenne and Sioux were mounted on their ponies and swarming down the hills toward the Bluecoats. As we went into the troops, George Bent said, I saw an officer on a bay horse rush past me through the dense clouds of dust and smoke. His horse was running away from him. The lieutenant had an arrow sticking in his forehead, and his face was streaming with blood. The fatally wounded officer was Lieutenant Casper Collins. A few of the cavalrymen escaped and reached a rescue platoon of infantrymen on the bridge. Cannon from the fort broke off further pursuit by the Indians. While the fighting was going on, some of the Indians still on the hills discovered why the cavalrymen had marched out of the fort. They had been riding to meet a wagon train approaching from the west. In a few minutes, the Indians had the wagon train surrounded, but the soldiers dug in under the wagons and put up a stubborn fight. And during the first minutes of the fighting, Roman Nose's brother was killed. When Roman Nose heard of this, he was angry for revenge. He called out for the Cheyenne to prepare for a charge. We're going in to empty the soldiers' guns, he shouted. Roman Nose was wearing his medicine bonnet and shield, and he knew that no bullets could strike him. He led the Cheyenne into a circle around the wagons, and they lashed their ponies so that they ran very fast. And as the circle tightened closer to the wagons, we've all seen this scenario before, portrayed in movies and things. As the circle tightened closer, the soldiers emptied all their guns at once. And then the Cheyennes charged straight for the wagons, and they killed every last soldier. They were disappointed by what they found in the wagons. Nothing was there but soldiers' bedding and mess chests. That night in camp, Red Cloud and the other chiefs decided that they had taught the soldiers to fear the power of the Indians. This is the way it was done in their culture. We've taught them. Now they'll back off. And so they returned to the Powder River country, hopeful that the white man would now obey the Laramie Treaty and quit prowling without permission into the Indians' country north of the Platte. And there's a bit more to this story, but you know what? We really don't have time to finish it tonight. So tomorrow, well, not tomorrow, it'll be Monday, we're going to pick this story up where we are leaving off tonight. And we're going to blend that into, it'll be the end of the Sand Creek, I guess you could say the revenge for Sand Creek, turning into the Powder River invasion by the United States military. So there you go, folks. There is the massacre at Sand Creek. This is how it took place. And these are the reasons behind the reprisals by the Native Americans. Like I said, it's a grim history, but it's important that we know these things about our own history. Thanks for being here. We'll see you on Sunday morning at 9 a.m. sharp Central Standard Time, right here. And you have a good night and a good weekend.